the best new strategy game of 2023 according to Strategy and Wargaming, above games like Company of Heroes 3 or Stronghold. Let's dive in for a first look at this strong entry to the genre. Hello everyone and welcome to Second Front. This is a game I've wanted to jump into for a while now, and I know a lot of my friends have it on their wish list, so let's take a look. I've sat down for over 3 hours going through the tutorial and delving into other content, and whilst I feel I've only brushed the surface of the game's potential, I will share with you what I've found so far. I'm going to dive into the controls and mechanics so you strategy gamers have an idea if this piques your intellect, but do make sure to play through the tutorial if you pick up the game. Second Front is a World War II turn-based game with each turn split into phases or actions for each side. Whose phase it is shown by the relative colours in the top right. The phases in which you interact with your units start off with move and fire, then advance, and then fire. In between these are neutral phases, recovery and escape, where automatic actions occur. For recovery, that includes fixing weapons, which will have a chance to be damaged, and escape is the phase where units rout. The main two ways you move in the game are the move and fire and advance phases. Move and fire is pretty self-explanatory in that you can do both within the same phase. Advance is used to either gain extra ground, even under fire as it is safer than normal movement. It is also used for occupying the same tile as your enemy to initiate close combat. The fire phase is another phase in which you can fire, but only while stationary. Each tile can't have more than 3 infantry, with leaders taking up an optional 4th or 5th slot. You can split these stacks as well down to individual units in the bottom right. Leaders are really useful as they have 2 main functions: to improve the effectiveness of units they are supervising, and also attempt to rally broken or retreating units. When it comes to actually engaging the enemy, it's important to consider the different modifiers to accuracy, such as range, movement, and of course leaders. Moving before shooting will dramatically reduce your accuracy in the move and fire phase. The way you move with your infantry is also important. You can choose to run, walk, or crawl. Crawling is the best way to remain concealed in cover if you want to sneak up on your enemy, or just have less chance of being hit. But it will take time, as you can only crawl 1 tile and then advance 1 more tile per turn. Bear in mind, some units can even fire and remain in stealth, so you might not want to advance, but instead retain the stealth that crawling gives you. Whether or not you are spotted depends on how many units have line of sight on the tile you are moving to. The more that have line of sight, the higher the chance of your unit being spotted. If you or the enemy tries to move on a tile with a concealed unit, they will be revealed automatically. Now let's take a look at some of the support weapons, starting with machine guns. Machine guns and some other weapons have what is called a reload mechanic, where there is a chance per shot to be able to fire again immediately. This can happen multiple times in a row if you're lucky, allowing machine guns to put many rounds down range. And this might sound really strong, but in practice, machine guns aren't actually that accurate in this game. Machine guns and other emplaced weapons can also be packed up to increase their movement, but they won't be able to fire in the same turn. This is really useful for if you want your units to sort of catch up after they were previously covering you from range. Mortars are similar in mechanics to machine guns, except with indirect fire, and no ability at all to move and shoot. They can utilise the reload for multiple shots, as well as pack and unpack to move. What is really interesting is when targeting units in forests, HE munitions will airburst, causing more damage to infantry. There is also smoke munitions, which will reduce enemy accuracy, and just like everything else, it's important to note that leaders will dramatically increase a mortar's effectiveness. So you've successfully delivered multiple rounds on your enemy, and now they're routing. Units will attempt to flee when they are broken, and this is a lot more likely to happen than straight up killing your enemy. If you are adjacent to a unit, and it would be forced to pass your unit to continue routing, or simply doesn't have anywhere else to go, then the unit will instantly surrender. This is also the case when regarding buildings. You can trap the enemy on the top floor of a building, for example, if you guard the stairs, forcing them to surrender if they were to rout. If you can't make your enemy rout in buildings, there is always close combat. A risky but potentially very effective way of dealing with enemy forces. In the advanced phase, you can move onto the same tile as your enemy. The first thing to consider is the ambush modifier, which is based on terrain. Both sides will have a chance to ambush, and if one is successful, they will get a free initial attack, which could dramatically affect the outcome of the overall melee. If infantry is moving onto the same tile as enemy armour, then there is a different role, the aptly named anti-tank bravery test. There is a chance that one or more of your units won't have the stomach to engage enemy armour in close range, and will be pinned in place before they move should they fail the role. Once again, it's important to stress that leaders are really important for increasing ambush chance, decreasing chance of failing the bravery test, and being overall more effective in the melee. This is super important because when two units engage in close combat, they don't stop until one or the other is dead. There is an extra infantry mechanic to be aware of, that is the ability to pick up and drop weapons. Crew-specific squads are the only ones that can man AT guns or larger in-place weapons, but otherwise different squads can man mortars or machine guns, even those abandoned by your opponents. There are also singular weapons like Panzerschrecks or light machine guns you can have multiple of in a squad, or can even be picked up individually by heroes. Heroes are something that I only briefly got a chance to interact with, but I believe after combat there is a chance for a hero to spawn and they can significantly increase the damage a group of units can do. So as you can see, Second Front has very solid and deep game mechanics, but we aren't done yet. Let's take a look at vehicles. Vehicles use the same phase rules as infantry and support weapons, but do have some extra things to consider. First of all is facing. Facing is important when fighting against other units with armor penetrating ammunition. When you select a vehicle, you can choose which way it faces on a tile if there is enough movement points remaining. Facing the front armor in the right direction will reduce enemy penetration chance. Bear in mind you can freely move the turret, if there is one, to any direction, allowing you to engage softer targets whilst keeping the hull faced towards heavier targets. Vehicles also have different move orders. Move, or move and stop. Stopping uses an extra movement point, but will give you more accuracy when firing. Normal move is useful for drawing fire, or if you only want to use some movement points before moving another unit. For example, getting one unit out of the way for another, since vehicles can't occupy the same tile. Certain vehicles, like tanks, can also have the crew exposed or buttoned up. If the crew is exposed, the vehicle can move faster and see further. Contrary to what you might think, it does not make the crew vulnerable. However, an exposed crew can be forced to button when suppressed. Furthermore, certain weapons can only be used in either buttoned or exposed stances. For example, a pintle mount machine gun requires exposed, whilst the smoke launcher on a Jagdpanther requires the crew to be buttoned up. Terrain is also important to consider with vehicles. Starting with the limitations, vehicles cannot enter trench, rock, graveyard or woods tiles unless there is a road. Vehicles cannot capture buildings unless there is a vehicle entrance or garage. Only fully tracked vehicles can move over walls, whilst fully and half-tracked units can move over hedgerows. Otherwise, all other vehicles are free to roam around and can be very fast, although certain terrain like fields will slow you down. If a transport vehicle has remaining move points, they can also unload in the same turn too. When firing with a vehicle, similar to infantry, moving before firing negatively affects the chance to hit, as I mentioned before. Having an exposed crew, however, can increase your chance to hit, assuming that your crew doesn't need to be buttoned to fire, as is the case with some tanks. Best case though, you have an exposed crew, and you don't need to move before you fire. This will give you the best accuracy. So that about sums up most of the game mechanics which dictate the flow of the missions and campaigns. So let's talk about some of the other nice things about Second Front. The graphics, for example, while simple, portray the flow of battle really well, and the models actually look really nice. The UI took me a little bit of time to get my head around, but hopefully with some of my explanations that will speed up the process for you guys. When you zoom in, the UI is actually removed, and the battlefield becomes almost a diorama. I found that really cool. The ability to look and interact with each level of the different buildings to see the men inside is a nice touch too. When looking at the content as a whole, there is a lot to do, including many scenarios for the Germans, Russians and Americans. There is also persistent campaigns which you can unlock more of by completing the scenarios. The first campaign I played really surprised me in a good way, when I realised each map moves from one to the other seamlessly, and keeping units alive means you take them with you into the next part. That being said, I personally stumbled the first time I was playing. The tutorial encouraged patience, and so I waited too long by accident. So a word of advice: don't lose track of your objectives or how long you have to take or hold them. Even more interesting, however, was that even though I was lost or technically defeated, the campaign actually continued. I just missed out on the score from that part. So what that tells me about the game is that pretty much everything is replayable and encourages you to do better and get a better score each time round. The depth of the game is actually stellar, and I'm a big fan of how each turn has different phases which dramatically affects the way you play the game. This game could have very much had a simple turn-based combat mechanic similar to Civilization, but the way it's presented is actually very intuitive. Now, if all that wasn't enough, there is an integrated workshop where you can download and play user-created scenarios and campaigns. You can also spend time making your own from scratch, or edit someone else's. Finally, there is a garage where you can admire all the units in the game and compare them between factions. So overall, Second Front has proved to be a pretty awesome strategy game. Its initial presentation may put some people off, but having spent some time really understanding the game, I find myself really impressed with the mechanics, pacing, and sheer amount of content. I will definitely find myself playing this game again in the future because it just has so much I want to explore. But for now, hopefully you have enjoyed this first look at Second Front. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.